Hi, my name is Brittany Green, and for my research paper, I looked at virtual economies. More specifically, I did an economic analysis of the World of Warcraft auction house. So, as massive multiplayer online video games have become more popular and sophisticated, economists have begun to investigate the nature of the virtual economies within those games, both as individual entities and as a comparison to our real-world economy. Economic analysis of video games is a relatively new field that first appeared about a decade or so ago as video games moved online and began to allow significant and sophisticated interactions between players. Academics economists have sought out video games for investigation of economic principles for several reasons. First, the markets within video game economies are often less regulated than those in the real world. They're often a more true free market economy. Second, it is much easier to influence changes in a virtual economy than in the real world. Brad Plumer, in his Washington Post article, The Economics of Video Games, said, quote, "A virtual world, after all, allows economists to study concepts that rarely occur in real life. The data is richer, and it's easier to run economy-wide experiments in a video game, experiments that, for obvious reasons, can't be run on countries." So for my paper, I looked at the economy in World of Warcraft. So I'm going to first present a very, very brief introduction to the economy in World of Warcraft. I'm going to refer to World of Warcraft interchangeably with WoW throughout the presentation. So the economy of World of Warcraft is something that I could, write pages and pages about. So for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to write the very, very basics needed for understanding my later analysis. So World of Warcraft is a fantasy-style MMORPG released in 2004. It's regarded as the most popular MMORPG of all time, with 100 million accounts being created by early 2014. To date, there have been 5 expansion sets, with a 6th expansion set planned for release later this year. Players are able to choose one of 12 classes and one of 14 races split between the two factions, Horde and Alliance. Players are able to collect money by completing objectives and selling goods received by completing those objectives. They're able to collect money from killing mobs and created through professions, including engineering and tailoring, which are shown on this screen right here. Additionally, valuable items like gear and weapons can be obtained through completing higher-level raid objectives and through professions. But players are limited to 2 professions, so many high-level items must be obtained through trade. Trades are conducted in 2 ways. First, items and money can be traded directly between 2 people. Second, items can be posted by one player for a set cost on an auction house and purchased later by another player. There is one auction house used by both Horde and Alliance on each server, and then there are 3 units of currency used by both factions, gold, silver, and bronze. 1 gold is equal to 100 silver, and 1 silver is equal to 100 bronze. So, next I'll talk about where I collected my data from, what data I collected, and why, and to discuss some limitations. So, to conduct my analysis of the auction house, I used data collected by the Undermined Journal, which is a website that constantly collects all auction house data across every server and aggregates it onto a website or a downloadable add-on that we can use beads to game. And they also have historical auction house data available for download in an online image, which is where I got my data. So the sheer quantity of data available for download made conducting a comprehensive analysis of all auction house items far, far out of the scope of this project. So for my analysis, I decided to look only at the average daily auction house price of the 10 different cloth types currently in the game. I decided to look at cloth because it is an item obtainable by any class. The different levels of cloth are a common drop from kill mobs throughout the leveling process, and it is used by multiple classes, both as a material for creating cloth armor for certain classes and as a material for creating bandages used for healing by all classes. So cloth is likely to be a highly and consistently traded set of items. So the 10 types of cloth I pictured here are linen cloth, wool cloth, silk cloth, mage weave cloth, rune cloth, nether weave cloth, frost weave cloth, ember silk cloth, wind wool cloth, and sumptuous fur. So the lowest level is linen cloth, collected by characters, in the lower 1 to 10, 15 levels, and then next is wool cloth and silk cloth. And currently the highest level of cloth is sumptuous fur, which is collected by players in the most recent expansion pack, the Warlords of Draenor, which is about levels 90 to 100. So I downloaded the daily average price and quantity available of each of the 10 cloth types for each of the 245 U.S. auction houses from December 12, 2014 to July 5th, 2016, which is a span of 565 days. So that's a total of 2,768,500 data points, which is still a huge amount of data, but nowhere near as extensive as it could have been, obviously. However, the data collected only shows the costs and quantities available on the auction house, but does not indicate whether the items available actually sold at those costs. So I'm unable to make a perfect analysis of exactly how the data mirrors real-world economic principles, but based on the analysis of the people, I did some research before I conducted my analysis, they decided that it was a good enough measure, so I'm deciding it's a good enough measure as well. So for my analysis, I took the average cost across all houses to get the overall average cost of each type of cloth per day. Then I tracked the cost over time to see if I could detect a trend in overall prices, which I was going to use as a rough measure of the consumer price index used in a real-world economy. Then I conducted the same analysis with quantities and time to see if there was a trend in quantity over time. I also looked at the average cost compared to average quantities to see if there was a relationship between cost and quantity for analysis of supply and demand. Before I start showing off all my graphs, this is a legend I use. Each different kind of cloth has its own color, and then there will be vertical lines, red, blue, and green, that point to specific events that happen that I'll talk about in a minute. So first, this is my cost versus time graph. You'll notice over time that costs across the board decrease slightly. Sumptuous fur right here has a sharp decline in cost, and then a sharp increase in cost, and then a decline and an increase and decline and increase. Additionally, windwool cloth saw it decrease. But one of the most interesting things for me was that the lower level cloth prices aren't necessarily the cheapest cloth prices. Silk cloth is, the third lowest level item, but it's still the second highest. It has the second highest average cost at the end, which I found was kind of interesting. This is my quantity versus time graph. Again, ember silk cloth, sumptuous fur shows a distinct, interesting pattern, while everything else kind of just decreases over time. I guess gradually increases over time. Looking into these with a little more detail. First, I wanted to see whether the different types of cloth increase and decrease along a similar pattern. So can I detect an overall market shift based on just these certain items? I analyzed this both graphically by shifting the spread and locations of the different cloth types to see if overall patterns can be seen, and mathematically by calculating whether the trends were correlated, or how much of the price increase in one cloth is predicted by the price increase in another cloth. Graphically, which is what you see here, there is a distinct pattern that can be seen across all cloths. You can see a gradual decline and then increase and then a gradual decline, except for nether weave cloth, which saw an increase in the end. And throughout all of this, you'll see that nether weave cloth kind of behaved differently than the rest of the cloths. For a reason, I have no idea. Looking at the correlation calculations, we can mathematically say that the cloth trends are correlated. All these numbers are between -1 and 1, with negative numbers indicating an indirect relationship and positive numbers indicating a direct relationship. So numbers further from 0 indicate a sharper relationship. So you can see that linen and wool cloth have a very strong direct relationship. Everything is pretty strong with the exception, again, of nether weave cloth, which saw some pretty small numbers and some negative numbers, which was unexpected. So when I first started looking at the graphs, I noticed some definite changes in data at certain points. And looking further into detail, I found that there are some dates of interest that impact the data. Namely, the release of the newest expansion set, Warlords of Draenor, content patches, hotfixes, and the Winter Veil Festival. So first, my data started in December 2014, which was about 1 month after the release of the 5th expansion set, World of Warcraft, Warlords of Draenor. With the release of this expansion, the maximum level increased from 90 to 100, and new items and armor sets became available. Of interest in the expansion is the release of a new cloth type, Sumptuous Fur, New tailoring items and battenges require this new cloth, which drives up the demand for it, and in contrast, significantly reduces the demand for the previous maximum cloth type, wind wool cloth. So you can see a sharp increase in quantity available and correlated sharp decrease in cost of substitutes for the first several months of the data, which follow this expected pattern, as is the sharp decrease in cost with fairly consistent available quantity, showing a decrease in demand of wind wool cloth, which you can see right here. Additionally, the quantity of sumptuous fur available remains higher than all other forms of cloth throughout the data collection period, as can be expected as both supply and demand are higher. There are more higher level characters collecting the top level cloth, and there are more high level characters who need that cloth. A sharp decrease in quantity available of wind wool cloth in the first few months following the release of the expansion shows a similar trend. Wind wool cloth lost its previous place atop the tradability level of the cloth, but its popularity in the auction house declined, which you can see right here. Periodic patches are released by Blizzard either to add new content or make fixes to current content. Within the data, I noticed 3 sharp changes in either cost, quantity, or both that coincided with the release of new patches. The first 2, on February 24th and March 24th, 2015, released content that sharply shifted the cost of cloth, especially among the higher level cloths. For instance, it's these vertical lines, red lines right here. For instance, you can see a 100 silver increase in cost of sumptuous fur over 1 day after the release of an expansion of the patch, without a similar incredible increase in quantity available over that 1 day. Which suggests that there was a strong increase in the demand of sumptuous fur as a result of the patch. And then the third patch, which was on June 24th, 2015, which is indicated by this vertical line, was simply a hotfix, which means there may have been some slight changes, but no new content was released. It didn't result in a major change in supply and demand trends, but it did result in the major decrease in quality of auctions on quantity on that day only. Possibly because the patch forced the servers to be shut down for part of the day and fewer people were able to post and purchase auctions. So you can see a sharp decline just on that 1 day, especially among, for instance, sumptuous fur, which had a cloth price right there for just that 1 day. Winter Veil is the annual Christmas event held in-game for about 2 weeks in late December. Patterns or special costumes, Santa hats, and Santa costumes, as you can see right here, are available, which require certain types of cloth, and there are special tags available that may also shift the supply and demand of cloth. So the event resulted in a dramatic shift in both costs and quantities of cloth for about a week before both metrics returned to the pre-Winter Veil levels. So you can see Winter Veil is indicated by a vertical green line right here. You can see costs across the board shift incredibly for about 1 day. It is a dramatic increase in beige leaf cloth, and then a dramatic increase in wool cloth, dramatic increase in sumptuous fur. And then this is the quantity where you can see, a dramatic decrease in everything for just this 1 day. One of the characteristics of a perfectly competitive market is the supply and demand curve and a market equilibrium. This economic principle says that as prices increase, supply will correlate directly, while demand will correlate indirectly. In other words, as item gets more expensive, more people want to sell them and make more money, but fewer people will want to buy them. Eventually, supply and demand will meet at a price equilibrium. Presumably, in the economic model of the WoW auction house, the auction house price is the market equilibrium, as stated before. We don't know for certain in this case because our data doesn't indicate whether auctions were sold, only that they existed, but we're just going to go by that assumption that it is the equilibrium. So looking at both graphically and calculated data of cost versus quantity, we can see strong negative relationships across most cloth types, indicating that the law on supply and demand does exist here. Regression lines have strong R-squared values, which means that there is a strong Regression lines have high variables and strong R-squared values, indicating that there is a strong relationship, and that the strong relationship is easily described by the regression line. So you can see the strong negative relationships here. However, with netherweave cloth, again, there was almost no relationship between cost and quantity. And with wind wool cloth, there was a strong positive relationship between cost and quantity, which is completely beyond me. It's indicating that the laws of supply and demand doesn't work universally here, and it shows the limitations of this kind of analysis. Further investigation into why this occurred will have to be saved for a later paper. Additionally, numerically, you can see right here, everything has a pretty negative relationship except for wind wool, which has a strong positive relationship, and netherweave, which has a very almost non-existent negative relationship. My original intention when collecting and analyzing data was to look at the consumer price index, which is used to measure inflation over time by analyzing cloth prices and see how it shifted. I assume that since there's no external control over inflation and the quantity of money within the market as a whole is consistently increasing, the cost of cloth, and by extension, CPI would also consistently increase. However, to my surprise, costs decreased for 9 of the 10 cloth types I looked at, regardless of how much the quantity available decreased or increased. I spent several days investigating and talking to other players and cannot come up with a reasonable explanation for why this would occur. So you can see across here, costs over time decreased almost across the board, with the exception, again, of netherweave cloth, which increased over time. So, as can be seen by my surprise discovery about cost decreasing as over monetary ownership increased, a virtual economy is not always a perfect measure of analyzing real-world economies. As Kosminski in Fighting Adam Smith in Azeroth noted, so you can see that World of Warcraft is, on the face of it, a better example of a perfectly competitive market than anything we see in the real world. Unfortunately, there are certain areas where the parallels between our real and virtual worlds break down. So, why is this? First, humans don't always behave in the way we expect them to. Second, the economy, while closer to a theoretical, perfectly competitive economy, is still susceptible to unexpected trends. Plumer in 2012 noted, this summer while working for Valve, an economist used data from the game Team Fortress 2 to measure how often this actually happened, and it turned out the economy can veer far from equilibrium surprisingly often. Third, there are limitations in the real world that aren't present in the virtual world that limit the ability of one to transfer to the other. For example, there are no necessary items to WoW. Players don't need, for example, food or shelter to survive. Additionally, there are infinite resources in the virtual world. If someone needs more of a certain item, he can collect it theoretically infinitely. In the real world, it's not possible to collect an infinite number of, say, bolts of linen cloth. Still, despite the limitations, economists are flocking to virtual economies within video games to help get information about real-world economies. Thanks.